Welcome to Inside the Set with Set Decor. Inside the Set is a series that focuses on the design and decor of stories that excite us and ignite our imaginations, where we get to discuss the collaborations between production designers and set decorators, and hear firsthand accounts of how those works of art came to be, from their inception to ideas on the page through completion, where we sit in the dark and experience them collectively.
Welcome to Inside the Set with Set Decor. I'm Don Diers SDSA. Today, I'm pleased to welcome set decorator Damien Segee and production designer Mark Steele to discuss their imaginative collaboration on the Prime Video's global hit series, The Boys. Damien and Mark, thank you for joining.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Just to tee up this conversation in the context of what this show is, it was a comic book by Garth Ennis that Eric Kripke developed, wrote, and has been a showrunner on this show for all the seasons. And I wanted to sort of talk to you at the beginning, really, about the universe that you create that is possibly different for a comic book that you're referencing, as opposed to maybe just a script that is a cop show or a teenage comedy or any number of things, and how you would approach that to start your prep on a show like this.
For me, I joined the sort of established pantheon of this franchise in season 4. So when I joined, the overriding ethos was about actually sort of an anti-superhero idea, in the sense that what we were trying very hard to do is be as normal in the world that we were creating. So our characterizations and our Vought world and our soups became sort of in this very American typical society that we were trying to portray. So that was sort of the overriding ethos, was to kind of go as real as we could with the sort of cultural landscape and the graphic landscape. And the areas inhabited by the soups had this particular thing going on. Like Vought Tower was a particular sort of architecture for them. But essentially the conceit was the normalcy of the world was clashing with their particular world. And that was really fun, because for us, we were able to kind of explore these sort of juxtapositions, which I think you'll see in episode 403 with the ice show, for instance. How we have a very familiar world, but it's inhabited by these supernatural or superpowered beings. And that was sort of always the underlying ethos.
And Damien, did anything sort of change in your approach based, again, that this is a show that's been established, and how you wrap your head around defining characters or characters' workspaces?
You really have to dig into the characters because they have been established. I mean, on some shows, we're kind of establishing the character because it's season 1, but in season 4, most of them they're established, except for the new ones that show up, like Firecracker, for example. So we kind of have to follow the rules and laws of these superheroes as they relate to the sets and, their spaces and, the grandeur of Homelander's apartment and, how the rest of his staff kind of lives in a little lesser level than he does. And, as he worked down to the web weaver apartment, another, soup, so to speak, he lives in disgusting conditions. So you really have to dial in, and the art department, provides concepts, and, we start to work from that. And, of course, our showrunner gives us lots of input into what direction we should be headed.
It's interesting because web weaver is like the saddest of, I think, out of any of the soups, and has a disgusting, it's a loft, I assume, kind of apartment.
Yeah. I mean, it was a loft that we made in I think an open empty space, if I recall.
Yeah.
So, put in walls and made it into sort of a loft, but, you can see the remnants of his, life of despair and drinking and drug use. And, it was a fun one to dress. And then, of course, special effects came in and webbed the whole thing up because he has no control over his web stream.
Right. Yeah. Also, and I'd like to discuss this all through all the sets, really, because I noticed the lighting is so beautiful, and both in the practicals, but then in the provided windows that are in many of the sets, and wonder if there's sort of discussion with the DP about that, because in that particular stills of web weavers, there are like lamps that are either set low or the lampshades are solid lampshades and the light is popping out of the top. Was that a discussion you had with the DP, or is that just part of your vision or a happy accident of how it really beautifully lit the webs?
I think, I love practical lighting, so I'm always very interested in, what style we're going to put on what set and how it's going to look. There is some discussion with the DPs, but as you know, we're moving so quickly. Sometimes it is entrusted to us to give them what they need. And some shows, the DOPs, want to know about every single light we do, and some distrust you to do it. So
Yeah, yeah, good. I'm glad that it's encouraged that way. And Mark, in your design of the show, there is, for instance, I look at like the mansion. What's the rich guy's name?
Tech Night. Yeah.
Tech Night. That was a built set?
It was a mix. It was a hybrid.
Yeah.
We had sort of three zones for that character. There was his actual living situation, which is where we see the reception, which was a very kind of a unique location in Toronto. But then we also had a little piece where his study led to the secret access to his downstairs basement. We called it his sort of cave slash, bondage room type situation. So those were built on stage, and those were, again, it was kind of interesting. We talked about that a little earlier about the characters. What the boys has always had is this sort of social hierarchy amongst the supes, which is a unique thing to the superhero kind of style. So it's fun to sort of explore those things. So whereas Tech Knight is sort of on all, I think I forget what his particular power, but he had this sort of other thing, this sort of kink. So we got to sort of take the audience on a journey into how deep that goes. And every character, like whether it's Web Weaver or certain ones, we usually get kind of a note about where they are, with that sort of social economic class,
Yeah, add to that, the interesting thing about most of these soups is, the obvious thing is their juxtaposition to the soups we all grew up with. And, Tech Knight and his kind of, we can imagine who he is designed off of, but he's a kind of an awful version of that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
yeah.
Exactly. And I noticed also like your use of portraits of him. Did you commission a portrait of the actor?
Yeah, we did. We modeled it on a portrait that might be familiar to certain members of your audience in your country, who shall be remain nameless. We had a sort of a backstory for him too, where his whole family, essentially, I believe, Tech Knight's fortune was built on slavery. So there's a whole kind of subtext throughout that set. If you zoom in on a lot of that portraiture, there's a whole sort of history that we created for him and backstory.
That's what I noticed, and that's why I'm asking that. And that is really, one of the things that I think is so special about both the craft of art direction and set decoration is that ability to tell the story through the setting and the selections. And I noticed some portrait that looked like it was a Confederate general or something in an oval frame, and I'm like, oh, those kinds of things, doing those simple, or maybe it wasn't simple, but those precise sort of hits help the audience constantly know where we're at, further the story. I think he's like 11th generation, of billionaire money from the slave trade. And anyway, I think what's great about that is how well it's put together for however long this scene is. I also noticed in the dungeon that we do get to see the cave ceiling, and I wonder if that was any kind of a challenge for everybody lighting the set.
It was a big sculptural build. I mean, it was pine and paper mache and plaster and all those things. And so, I mean, a lot of the lighting, and this is sort of the movement and maybe as a broader conversation about set decoration, but a lot of the technology now of lighting sets comes from the practical lighting. And Damien can speak more to this, but we go to great lengths to install fixtures that are all color corrected RGB, and they can be dimmed and controlled. So a big part of designing that set was on, figuring out how the source works in there. And one of the kind of early iterations of that set, we had designed a sort of an area, kind of like Bruce Wayne's Batcave vibe, with like a big monitor wall and all this stuff as a source of light. And we decided, partly into the development of the set, to eliminate that as a feature. And then we were left with this idea about how do we generate that kind of lighting effect inside of this cave. So I I kind of pitched the idea of that we do it like a big white tile wall, like, and it's a big wet space that you can hose down, that sort of girl with a dragon tattoo kind of thing, where, you know, this is clearly something very dark happens here, but it gives us the ability to bounce a mixed color temperature and make that become another source of light inside the cave. So we kind of are very conscious of how that light interplay works, especially in that sort of highly stylized space.
Yeah, I noticed that. And I noticed like a built-in niche at one point, which has some sort of soffit lighting.
Yeah.
And, you know, those techniques, you know, I think some DP told me years ago, he says, you can decorate the set as much as you like. He says, but if we don't light it, we won't see the beautiful work you do.
Yep.
And, you know, like you're saying, in these days with, you know, we can shoot in low light, it has increased both the opportunity, but also the responsibility of both the production designer and the set decorator to think about not only just the character or the couch or that the door opens, is that how am I going to help them light the set? When you guys are putting together a season, are you guys conscious like assigning a color palette maybe to characters or to a mood, or is it based on a location? Like, how does that process come together for a show like this one, where the characters are wearing, you know, sort of these graphic costumes often, and they're often colorful? Or
for the boys, I mean, we really sort of fed on the sort of neutrality and the sort of metallics around most of their environments to sort of set off the costuming. Homelander visits his sort of childhood trauma site. He goes back to the place where they kind of locked him in the room and tested him. And we were really kind of thinking what we wanted in that situation was sort of key color hits. Like, we wanted him, for starters, you would first reveal the space as a sort of very neutral, concrete, bunker, shiny floor, stainless steel world. And he would be the brightest thing in there. And then we tried also to add color cues for things like the bad door room where he was put in was the red door. So like we tried to kind of connect the trauma with the palette in that situation. And then we also find sometimes there's a kind of over the topness with the boys where we just go so saturated red, white, and blue, like it just becomes this sort of massive hit. Which sort of, you know, when we do the rallies and when we do certain spaces like his apartment, when we did it for Christmas, we did a whole red, white, and blue Christmas. Like we just turn up that thing to 11, you know, and it's really kind of shifts, you know, really with the intention more than an overall ethos, you know. So, you know, we had some fun with that stuff too.
Talk about the red, white, and blue. Now I'll bring up Firecracker's apartment. Damien, if you would speak a bit about it, it's not a long scene. It's an intense scene with the two of them there, but the level of comedy is, I don't want to say screaming, but it's pretty loud there. Can you talk to me a bit about your choices there and maybe when you decided too much was too much?
I don't think too much was ever too much. You know, we kind of started out with, I think, her podcast. Then I think we rolled into her apartment, and it just became of, you know, get out the red, white, and blue cannon and exploded all over the set.
I know you didn't find that couch at IKEA because it's literally upholstered in red, white, and blue, and just the kind of taxidermy and the murals and the art in there.
We ended up, getting a sofa and recovering it. It's actually covered, it's red, white, and blue, but it's actually firecrackers.
There are firecrackers in it.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. And then we're, you know, just anything I could think of that those weird things, you know, Americana you see on the road trips through America, and stuffed rattlesnake on the bar and
plaques.
And you know, there's dead animals on the wall, which would be so anti-woke. And like all those points are hit. And again, for a short scene, we get, you know, sort of a repulsive, but you're sort of fascinated leaning in, like, what is this woman, right? You know, and it nails it, and it does it with comedy. Like, I love, even there's like florals that are made out of little small flags, like those kinds of dopey touches that really, you know, she's not a smart girl, but, you know, so you can see her sort of thinking that's, you know, she's being American, but also she's decorating or something.
Yeah, she has no class or no taste, or it's really quite awful in a way, but also fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, we talked about it too. I remember we were saying like this is like new money. This is the anti sort of elite sophistication that she's basically inherited Starlight's place, right?
Okay.
So we were thinking, for her kind of thing, like what's the ultimate, prize in a living room? Was we said we got to get one of those giant sectionals that turns into like 4 recliners that you can put your drinks in. Like in her mind, that's like the peak of like, wow, look, I can get one of these. And but the funny, we also knew too, we only had like this one time. Like this really, I don't think we ever were back in her apartment. So we knew this was one shot at really making that impression. And we did at the time, there was a candidate in your election that was putting out these memes, these crazy memes of flying on eagles' backs and touting guns. So we did this great. She's on a T-Rex with an eagle and a bear. We had it a certain size. Damien and I were trying to tastefully, at least, sort of decorate this room proportionally to the space. And the note from Eric was, no, that's got to be bigger. Make it bigger. I think we sized it up 2 more times, and to the point of where we're like at what you see on camera, which was kind of fun. Like again, like Damien was saying, we couldn't go far enough, really.
And that's nice to get those kinds of notes from both the showrunner, writers. Is that that's great, but more is better. And there's also another mural, which is not unlike the Slim Pickens riding the bomb in Dr. Strangelove, where
That's right.
Firecracker's riding a bomb. And those kinds of like cues that you give, which are complete, accurate bits of American history or even American cinema. Like I said, we get it right away. Like it doesn't have to be on screen that long. Where audiences are sophisticated and able to, check that right away. You had mentioned also the Homelander on Ice set, and I wanted you to speak a bit about building things or rigging on ice. Was that a real ice rink you're shooting at?
That was, and it's a funny thing, essentially it was being handed another medium. It's like, okay, we do set design, we've done some theater, but now here's a new thing. This is stadium ice capades type stuff. And we just dove in and we said, okay, well, first thing we had to do is figure out the scale. So we built a practical model of it on our art department table. When episodic, we always know kind of we have a few scripts ahead, and we might not have all the scripts. We know they're coming. And often showrunners will give me a heads up, and exactly that was the thing, was we're going to do an ice show in episode 3. And you're like, oh, okay, but like we're doing this right now. We're busy. Like we're not really thinking about that yet. We just know it's coming. As the week goes by or 2, he starts to realize, you get some pages, you realize, okay, this is going to happen. And we're like in the middle of a big schedule and a big sort of season. And we were really fortunate. We ended up getting a minor league hockey arena that was not far outside of Toronto that had like 6 days of nobody using it. So we raced out there and looked at it and started sort of, and it was a sort of a place that, did concerts too. So there was a kind of in-house apparatus, and started printing our pieces just to kind of get an understanding of the proportions that we have to do for this to even register. And it was all done it actually really came together very smoothly in the middle of everything else. It kind of, I think, was different enough. It just kind of demanded a sort of level of attention. It was a relatively straightforward sculptural exercise, so not as many departments needed to know what was happening right away. So we had a little bit of space to just develop this and then present it to everybody. And then we had a lot of experts help us. We had a lighting technician come in from the West Coast who was basically a lighting guy for ice shows. So that became another learning curve. We had, the staging stuff. Basically, the background set was a series of trompe l'oeil layers, was backdrops basically and facades that we layered and lit for depth. The lowest pieces on the ice were actually sculpted. We were doing kind of a sort of almost cartoony version of Bethlehem.
Yes.
So those we actually built physically. So we were able to kind of get our hands around the scale quickly and then, get it assembled, and it worked. And, on top of everything we just described, we had like a 6 days front to back. So
yeah,
3 days of setup, which was sort of like rock and roll, and then 3 days of rehearsal performance, and then 24 hours to just overnight get out of there kind of thing. So we did an interesting thing with the ice show stadium, because we had all this piece up in the private box. We had pieces up in the grandstands that there was a pursuit where Huey gets in the ductwork and Homelander's up in the box and he's lasering and all that stuff. So we built the tunnel network or the duct network on stage. And we also built a replica of the box on stage as well on a kind of 6-foot riser so we could get the lighting and the eye lines right. So we intercut between the stage set and the location for all of those pieces. So that was a big sort of exercise for sure. Oddly, at first it was supposed to be destroyed completely, and then I think we backed away from that because we only had enough time to do what you see in the actual event, So
Well, the carnage is pretty enjoyable in that because it just keeps going.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like a domino effect of accidental deaths or whatever. Yeah, and always that kind of pressure of like, oh yeah, we want it up here, but we have 6 days, and so good luck to the art department to carry that out. And are there other sets in this episode that were from soup to nuts builds? Is the jail visitors processing center, is that in this episode?
Yeah, that was a location that we did. Yeah.
I hear also is the abandoned Fresh Farms warehouse. Was that a build?
It was very much a build, and it was actually a swing of Starlight House. So we did Starlight House in the first couple blocks, and then we switched out to Fresh Farms over for the back end of the show of the season. So it was a full swing over Christmas in between the New Year. And, Damien's team did a phenomenal job making, I think you can talk a little bit more about procuring all of that mechanical stuff that was just phenomenal, which really made the place sing. Maybe Damien wants to talk about Fresh Farms.
Yeah, I mean, it was a huge dress, even bigger than Starlight House. And it was interesting, to, again, kind of going from the bright and cheery Starlight House, which ends up getting trashed, and then turning it into this kind of derelict factory. We spent a lot of time on lighting and texture on the walls and procuring these big vats, which we graphicked and scenic, and I feel like we had a couple weeks on this one, so it really came together quite nicely.
We had a bit of time. In fact, I think we were working on that while we were doing on the other side of the wall. Basically, was the cave.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Knight's Cave and the stage at the same time, kind of thing.
It's interesting to even speak about, like furnishing a warehouse as opposed to furnishing a home. Again, in, film and television work, we're, charged with decorating spaces and then telling a story. And, well, it's not someone's house, but it is someone's workspace or some company's workspace. And so sort of there is a logic that goes into, well, this wouldn't be there, or I want to put this there, and so I want to, sort of go backwards so that I can, like I saw, there's like a not assembly line, but a track that goes through, and so to me, I like that just because I can imagine both an action director or for what they want to do to light it, but also oh, we can use that as a cutting piece, and do those kinds of things enter your mind when you're out shopping for tanks and gantries and rolling staircases and barrels?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, how everything works and goes together and making sense of the space is a big part of my job and the buyers as well, kind of bringing it to me. And the amazing thing about this set is you kind of look at it and go, wow, it's really old and abandoned, but the conveyor belt and the barrels and all the pipe work and boxes and things on the wall and the lights were all brand new, and like the scenic department kind of brings it all into this palette that drives it home that it's, oh yeah, abandoned warehouse, and something was going on in here, but it's not anymore, and things are kind of in disarray, but you can still see the remnants of workspaces and workflow, etc.
Yeah, and I love the murals. I actually really, Mark, I love also the graphics, and I don't know whose department, I assume it comes under the art direction under yours, is in this show, both on the protest signs or in the graphics on the walls here. There's a lot of subtlety that's messages that sometimes remind me. I briefly looked at the original cartoons for the boys on or the drawings, and when people speak, there's a bubble and there's always this graphic. And in your show, there is a great amount of supporting information that is in wall posters or in signage or in protest signs or banners or even in a super short sequence, which is hysterical, when they're at the TruthCon convention and they stumble into the wedding that is a Marvelous Miss Maisel wedding
Yes.
theme that,
Yes.
is a short sequence. It's just like these dopey things. You, as an audience member, get the information quickly by these graphics. I just want to commend who's ever working on that part of the show, if that's both of you or some kind of separate department.
Well, thank you. I mean, we have a pretty great graphics team that we've been working with for many years, who are incredibly dedicated to the story and spend a lot of time getting into the scripts. And we have a whole channel going with the writers' room. At TruthCon was actually this kind of moment, like one of these moments that the sort of unsung heroes of the art department have a moment. It's just all about them. There was like wall to wall, floor to ceiling, graphic everywhere, and everybody had a hand in that. And the whole team, our team is at times about 6 graphic people working, and for them to be able to see all their stuff being the real story is a real thrill, and they take great pride in it, and I think it really shows. And like going back to the Bot Farms, there was a bit of a kind of Easter egg in there for some of the things that are starting to happen with the Boys franchise going forward, and maybe back in terms of backstory and history that's coming in the future. So we were sort of trying to plant a little bit of the seeds of some of the origin of VOT, and trying to tell the story of that as well by going sort of a mid-century, pre-war, post-war factory setting where it kind of like has call-outs to some of those more nefarious corporations of the past, and the VOT logo on the which is loosely Dow, loosely DuPont, loosely Big Petro, and food processing. That's all part of that story that we're trying to tell in those ones as well.
It's fun to be able to do those kinds of Easter eggs. And again, the audience is watching. And so the show, which is popular, people aren't just watching it once, they are watching it again and again. And so those things are not wasted effort. And again, what a joy for the graphics department that they actually are cutting away. Those were actually shots, part of a sequence.
Yeah.
And you really get to enjoy it when, they're cutting to it, because the director is saying, I really want you to notice this now. And this is part of the story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are there other things that you guys would like to sort of highlight that I haven't brought up that maybe were some of the things that either were an uber challenge or just gave you great joy that, you solved the puzzle, of how it had to fit together?
Yeah, I mean, it's the puzzle of how it all fits together is how we, moving through the series, the season, we're moving at almost a breakneck speed most of the time. I mean, I think we were working, 7 days a week a lot of the time just to pull this stuff off, because everything, I would say almost everything is on a pretty grand scale for the Boys. It's not about doing small little intimate sets. There's a couple moments, but really everything's on a grand scale, and we're moving, it all has to kind of lock into place, and everybody has to be in lockstep, and it all just kind of, it's amazing how I guess, the most satisfying thing is when you stand back and the set's done, but also kind of seeing it all somehow work its way to that final goal with all the different departments involved has always kind of amazed me through the years, how it, we start in chaos and it all hones down, and at one moment you're standing in the quiet looking at your work, and I've always taken pleasure in that.
Yeah, and it's the Boys as a sort of philosophy has been a lot about doing things in camera. So we've had, we've done some things. We've kind of gone back in terms of some of the older times of real wire work, real stunts, real falls, lots of some of the things that have taken a bit of a backseat to visual effects. I mean, there is a lot of visual effects in the Boys, but there are a lot of practical effects, a lot of practical stunts. So there are some really exciting days where we're all focusing on creating this one moment where all the departments might have all kinds of things happening simultaneously, but like Damien says, it comes back to a moment of quiet when we roll the camera, or it comes back to a moment of absolute cool chaos when that thing blows up and flips over. So there's all those things happening, and it was a wild ride, a lot of super fun.
the Flatiron building where the boys have their office, and this, is that an original set, a new set, or is that from a previous season?
That was developed in season 3, I believe.
Uh-huh.
So yeah.
Because I was looking at that, and I noticed, for instance, Damien, that you're using tank desks, those really solid kinds of, iconic bullpen desks. And at one point I saw them and I didn't know that, I couldn't remember if that set was in, but I knew that then there was a stunt and a, major stunt sequence in there. And I'm like, oh, that's why he picked those desks, because they can take a punch.
Yeah.
So sometimes maybe that's just dumb luck that either you inherit how the set was dressed and it works. Are there other times where you had an idea, but then what do we call, the rewrites are coming down, and it's like all of a sudden this path that you were going down is like, oh, but we can't do that because of this. Do those situations, catch you off? Or, I know you both have great teams to be able to just sort of recoil and adjust.
I mean, I think on a show like The Boys, it's very, like Mark says, very much about being in step with special effects and stunts. So, I'm discussing with the stunt coordinator what he's going to smash into. I'm discussing with the special effects coordinator what is going to get smashed. We're taking, I think at one point they trashed the whole office. And so that was taking things and refabricating them all so they can be safely broken or exploded on set, and, making foam posts and things like that. So I think, in some ways, special effects and stunts are driving the bus, and we're just helping facilitate what they need in those cases.
Right. And just for us, this show is a pretty violent show and a lot of graphic carnage. Can you speak to me about, blood and guts, and is that how that works with set dressing and also cleanup for both art department as well?
The blood and guts is something I only really get to see in the dailies or when it goes to air. It's all done on set. I've certainly put a few sofas and a few carpets and a few other things in the dumpster after they've been, because it's not just a little blood on this show. It's sprayed from wall to wall, but we know ahead of time that, okay, we're gonna purchase this stuff because they're gonna destroy it or burn it, or Homelander's gonna laser his whole apartment with his eyes. Is a case actually where we didn't, know that beat, or maybe we did early on in the season, but that had already been established. So it was kind of like, okay, you guys get to do this once. There's no going back for take 2. So they had to shoot a clean plate, and then we went in there and, cut the sofa in half and the TV and whatever else, the walls, and it's that kind of fun, and put rubble all over the floor, and then they shot that bit of it.
Yeah.
But there was no chance to go back and reset it up again and say, let's do it again.
Yeah, there's like the what's it called? The Homelander on Ice, which is a challenge. It's a different, sort of like proscenium, if you will. The puppet show has also separate requirements, and I've done some work with puppets before in my career, and I wanted to ask you if there are, sort of challenges with that, of like providing space for the puppeteers, or what those challenges might have been.
It was a big challenge, and kind of, I think Mark and I kind of tapped into our childhood to see how they kind of compose how puppets work, and how the furniture works and how the scenery works to hide the puppeteers, and put holes in the furniture for the puppeteers, and have a place, because the puppeteers, kind of a very uncomfortable job, or lying on a board on the floor with their hand, and also doing the voices and singing or whatever. So we're hollowing out, I think the day before or the day of, we're hollowing out the back of cushions and chairs, and the puppeteers are giving us notes on what they need, and trying to present this set in a way that is recognizable to the audience, that like, oh yes, this is what a puppet show looks like, and this looks like, kind of, maybe they'll harken back to their childhood, because it's a certain aspect and everything, the way they film it.
And it also visually has, when you cut to that, or even when you cut to like firecrackers on TV, those sets have a different look, because they are phony and they're not supposed to be on TV. And so both the lighting and the art direction that you guys have done lets us know that we're supposed to know that that's a pretend space, and so that the show continues on. But it also gives the show a lot of different flavors, like you say, that gritty aged world of the factory, and then something else that's much cheerier, like whatever, Homelander's house at Christmas.
Yeah.
Where I think you're not given those kinds of opportunities in cop shows or hospital shows or love stories or whatever. This kind of material lets you put on a kind of your own super suit of being super decorator, super designer, where you're like, no, bigger. You get those kinds of notes from the showrunner, was no, let's make that mural bigger.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
would say, like, to answer, to speak to that for a quick sec, one of the greatest things about the show was exactly that. What you're saying is you get a chance to explore all of these mediums. We were, when you're doing something that's a broadcast situation like the VNN News or Firecrackers podcast or the puppet show, and you're working in a 16:9 television aspect, and that's going to be played back on a screen, then filmed in 2:3:1. We're like moving between cinema and television. We were able to do things in the theatrical presentation. We were doing award show setups. We were doing rallies in squares, and you're dealing with that whole sort of stage craft and the proscenium language. Then we get to do an ice show, which is an entirely different medium. It's people's entire careers are in ice shows, and you get to just play with that and just, okay, let's do an ice show. And really kind of going down the path of Disney on Ice and all of these places, and analyzing that and saying, okay, how do we do our version of that? So it's been a lot of fun to get a chance to just dip your toe in all of these different mediums and pretend that you're an expert in them and make it work. And it looks great, I think, too. So worked out.
Yeah, and that's I think what you're talking about too, Mark, is that visual language, both that you understand, the two of you being professionals, but also as an audience member, and you see those things, and because of all the decisions that the two of you made, or and including the lighting, the DP, and the gaffer, about how I'm supposed to understand this space, and like you said, sort of the emotion or the feeling of, let's say, Web Weavers, where you walk in and you want to get creepy, or Fresh Farms, where you want to get creepy, and so. When you're making decisions, both in at the drafting table, let's say, or when you're out shopping, you have a choice to say, well, like this, no, more like that. And I think there's a lot of joy in that, probably.
Absolutely. And it's also kind of going into the rules of those, like when you really are true to the forms that you're doing in the story. For instance, like the puppet show, which is 3-camera studio television, like Sesame Street, all those things that we know. Like, you really find that's where the beauty, that's where the magic of it, that's where the realism comes from, is everyone getting in the headspace of saying, this is how this is done. We're producing this right now in this format, and that's becoming an element in our story that's inside of the cinema. And it's just great to have those times to explore the discipline around those little formats and then bring them to life. That's what this whole job really is it's just, we get to just test out all these cool things all the time.
Yeah.
Going back in time, it's always fun.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that they're all having to justify things in their past. And so there are several flashbacks, I think, as well. Do you treat those flashbacks differently, or do they do that in post, like desaturate them? Or do you guys have the discussion like, oh, I want to make sure that we know that's a flashback?
Unless there's a real period to it where we have to nail the period. A lot of the other more subtle ways of sort of saying we're in the past tends to be discussions with photography and lighting. I think kind of going into that realm of that sort of very gritty sort of favela moment and children fighting, you think about those movies about jungles and slums and stuff, right? And there's certain things I think that are kind of familiar to us in terms of how we would set this table for that. Even you've all seen photos and film of cockfights and stuff, like it really has a very powerful emotional sort of structure and energy. So I think when we were designing that set, we were really thinking about that. Like, how do we kind of get that same frenetic layers of people and a spectacle in a very sort of impromptu way? And the lighting was a big part of that. We wanted it to feel lit by like lanterns, and we wanted to see the shadows on the wall. And that kind of gives it a dreamlike quality. So those were all parts of the discussion in terms of how we were going to portray that flashback. But yeah, I think flashbacks give you a little bit of chance to be more cinematic and a little more, you can stretch the visuals into things that are slightly more dramatic and emotional, because they are really like dreams,
Wow, this has been really like I don't know, a whole secret discussion into how the sausage is made or how the show is made. And it's been so gratifying. Damien and Mark, this has been such a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your creative process with the viewers of Inside the Set with Set Decor.
Well, thanks for having us. It's great.
Yes, thanks for having us. Our pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Inside the Set with Set Decor. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and visit our website, setdecor.com.